Lieutenant Commander Daniel Harper sat alone in the corner booth of Murphy's Diner, the same weathered table where he'd eaten breakfast every Sunday for the past 3 months since returning to his hometown of Riverside, Montana. His coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but he didn't notice. He was staring at the mountains through the window, seeing a different range entirely, the jagged peaks of Afghanistan's Kunar Province that still haunted his dreams. The other patrons kept their distance. They always did. Some whispered behind their hands, shooting glances his way. Daniel knew what they said about him: broken, washed up. The SEAL who came home different at 42. Daniel should have been at the peak of his career. Instead, he'd taken early retirement after his last deployment, walking away from 20 years of service with nothing but a duffel bag and memories he couldn't shake. The town didn't understand. How could they? They saw a man who'd given up, who'd quit when things got tough. More coffee, Danny? Mary, the waitress who'd known him since high school, approached cautiously. She was one of the few who still treated him like a person. No thanks, Mary. I'm good. She lingered, wiping down the already clean table. You know, my nephew Bobby ships out for basic training next month. Army. He looks up to you. Daniel's jaw tightened. He shouldn't. Now, don't say that. I mean it, Mary. His voice came out harder than intended. Tell him to find a different role model. She walked away, hurt crossing her face, and Daniel felt the familiar weight settle deeper on his chest. This was who he'd become. A man who pushed away kindness because he didn't deserve it. His phone buzzed. A text from his younger brother, Kevin. Mom's birthday dinner tonight. 6 p.m. Please come this time. Daniel had missed the last 3 family gatherings. It was easier than facing the disappointment in his mother's eyes or listening to his brother-in-law, Craig, make subtle digs about him lounging around while real men worked. He typed back, I'll be there. The Harper family home sat on the edge of town. A white 2-story with blue shutters that his father had painted before his heart attack 5 years ago. Daniel arrived exactly at 6, armed with flowers from the grocery store and a rehearsed smile. His mother, Patricia, opened the door. Her face lit up for a moment before concern replaced it. Daniel, you came. Wouldn't miss it, Mom. The hug she gave him lasted longer than usual, and he felt her hands trembling slightly. She was 68 now, her hair more silver than brown, and he realized with a pang how much he'd missed by staying away. Inside, the house smelled like pot roast and apple pie. His sister, Lauren, waved from the kitchen. Her husband, Craig, stood by the fireplace, beer in hand, barely acknowledging Daniel's arrival. Look who decided to show up, Craig said, his tone light but his eyes cold. Surprised you could tear yourself away from staring at the wall all day. Craig. Lauren's voice held a warning. What? I'm just saying, some of us have to work for a living. Can't all retire at 40 and live off government checks. Daniel's hands clenched at his sides, but he forced them to relax. Craig was a real estate agent who'd never served a day in uniform. He didn't understand that the retirement pay Daniel received barely covered his rent, or that he spent most nights awake jumping at sounds, seeing faces in the darkness. Let's eat, Patricia said quickly, ushering everyone to the dining room. Dinner was tense. Kevin, who worked as a mechanic at the local garage, tried to keep the conversation light, talking about the new equipment he'd ordered. Lauren discussed her job at the elementary school. Craig dominated the conversation with stories about his latest property sales, each one seeming designed to highlight his success and Daniel's lack thereof. So, Danny, Craig said, cutting into his roast beef, when are you going to get a real job? The hardware store is hiring. Even you could stack lumber. Craig, that's enough. Patricia's voice was sharp. I'm serious, Patricia. The man was an officer in the Navy. Now he sits around all day like what? Daniel's voice was quiet, but something in it made Craig stop mid-sentence. Like I'm broken? Like I'm useless? Go ahead and say it. The table fell silent. Daniel could see his mother's eyes filling with tears, could feel Lauren's worried gaze. Kevin cleared his throat uncomfortably. Craig leaned back, smugness crossing his face. If the shoe fits. Daniel stood slowly, carefully placing his napkin on the table. Thank you for dinner, Mom. I'm sorry. Daniel, wait. Patricia reached for him, but he was already heading for the door. Outside, the cool Montana air hit his face. His hands were shaking, not from anger, but from the effort of holding everything in. He'd faced Taliban fighters without flinching, had made life-or-death decisions in split seconds. But he couldn't sit through a family dinner without falling apart. He sat in his truck for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel. His phone rang. Kevin's name flashed on the screen. I'm fine, Daniel answered. Craig's an idiot. We all know it. Mom's crying, and Lauren's giving him hell. It's not his fault. He's right. Don't finish that sentence. Kevin's voice was firm. You're my brother. You're a hero. I don't know what happened over there, but I know you well enough to know you did the right thing. Whatever it cost you. Daniel's throat tightened. You don't understand. Then help me understand. Talk to someone. Talk to me. I can't. He ended the call and started the truck. As he drove through the quiet streets of Riverside, past the park where he'd played as a kid, past the high school where he'd been quarterback, he felt like a ghost haunting his own life. What Craig and the others didn't know, what they could never know, was that Daniel hadn't quit the SEALs because he was broken. He'd left because of what happened on that mountain in Kunar Province, and because the Navy had made it clear that the truth would never come out. He'd been given a choice. Take the retirement with honors and stay quiet, or fight the system and lose everything. He'd chosen silence, and it was eating him alive. 3 days after the disastrous birthday dinner, Daniel was working on his truck in the driveway of his small rental house when a black SUV pulled up to the curb. 2 men in suits stepped out, and Daniel's instincts flared immediately. Federal agents. He could spot them a mile away. Lieutenant Commander Harper? The taller one approached, hand extended. I'm Agent Morrison, FBI. This is Agent Chun. We need to talk. Daniel wiped his hands on a rag, his mind racing through possibilities. I'm retired. Whatever this is about, I'm not your man. It's about Operation Silent Echo, Morrison said quietly. And SEAL team dispatched to the Peck Valley 3 months before you left the service. Daniel's blood ran cold. Silent Echo, the mission that had ended his career. The mission he'd been ordered never to discuss. I don't know what you're talking about. Agent Chun stepped forward. She was younger, with sharp eyes that seemed to see right through him. Commander Harper, we know what happened. We know about the intel failure. We know about the ambush. And we know about the ghost of Kunar. That name. Daniel hadn't heard it spoken aloud since his debriefing. His hand stilled on the rag. May we come inside? Morrison asked. This isn't a conversation for the street. Inside his sparse living room, Daniel sat across from the agents, every muscle tense. Morrison pulled out a tablet and turned it toward him. 12 hours ago, a 6-man SEAL team was inserted into the Korangal Valley for a high-value target extraction. The same valley where your team operated. The same intelligence network that fed you bad information is still active. And now, that team is trapped. The screen showed a topographical map with red markers indicating enemy positions. Daniel's trained eye immediately assessed the situation, and his stomach dropped. The SEAL team was in a kill box, surrounded on 3 sides with their backs to a cliff face. They have maybe 24 hours before they're overrun, Chun said. Command is scrambling a rescue, but by the time they mobilize the proper assets, it'll be too late. Those men will die. Why are you telling me this? Daniel's voice was rough. I'm retired. I'm out. Morrison leaned forward. Because you know that terrain better than anyone alive. You spent 8 months in Kunar, including 6 weeks moving through valleys most people don't even know exist. And because, he paused, choosing his words carefully, you know how to survive when you're surrounded and outgunned. Daniel stood abruptly, walking to the window. Outside, old Mrs. Peterson was watering her garden. Normal life, continuing while men were dying half a world away. The Navy made it very clear what would happen if I ever talked about Silent Echo, he said without turning around. They made it clear I was done. The Navy doesn't know we're here, Chun said. This is off book. We have assets in the region. A helicopter that can get you in. Equipment, weapons, whatever you need. But it has to be now, and it has to be quiet. You're asking me to go back. Daniel's reflection in the window looked older than his 42 years. Alone, into the same mountains that... He stopped. He couldn't finish that sentence. Couldn't talk about the 19 days he'd spent hunted through those mountains, watching his team die one by one, making impossible choices just to survive. We're asking you to save 6 men who are in the exact same situation you were in, Morrison said. Except this time, they don't have someone who knows how to get out. You do. Daniel turned to face them. Why me? Why not send in an active team? A ranger battalion? Air support? Politics, Chun said bluntly. The target they were after is a Pakistani EC agent who's been playing both sides. If this becomes official, it causes an international incident. These men get disavowed. But if someone who's already outside the system extracts them quietly ... I become the perfect deniable asset. Daniel laughed bitterly. A ghost sent to save ghosts. Those men have families, Morrison said. One of them has a 3-month-old daughter he's never met. Another is getting married in 6 weeks. They're good men on a bad mission, just like you were. Daniel closed his eyes. He could see them in his mind, young men, brave, trained, believing their country wouldn't abandon them, just like his team had believed. If I do this, he said slowly, and if I somehow pull it off, I want the truth about Silent Echo released. All of it. My team deserves better than being buried in classified files. Morrison and Chun exchanged glances. We can't promise that, Morrison said. But we can promise to try. We have people who owe us favors. The story might come out, eventually. Not good enough. It's the best we can offer. Chun's voice was firm. Those 6 men don't have time for negotiations, Commander. They need an answer now. Daniel walked to his bookshelf and pulled down a photo frame. Inside was a picture of his SEAL team, taken 2 weeks before Silent Echo. 12 men grinning at the camera, arms around each other, invincible. Only one of them had made it home. He traced his finger over the faces. Jackson, who died covering their retreat. Martinez, who'd bled out in his arms. Williams, Thompson, Anderson, all of them gone, because someone in an air-conditioned office had fed them bad intelligence and sent them into a trap. When do we leave? He asked quietly. 6 hours later, Daniel was on a civilian charter flight out of Denver, heading for a military base in Qatar. He'd stopped by his mother's house first, finding her alone in the garden. I have to go away for a few days, he told her. Maybe longer. Patricia had looked at him, really looked at him, and something had shifted in her expression. She'd cupped his face with both hands, the way she had when he was a boy. You're going to help someone, she'd said. It wasn't a question. I'm going to try. Then you come back to me, Daniel Harper. You hear? You come back. He'd hugged her tight, memorizing the smell of her perfume and the feel of her arms around him. Just in case. Now, 30,000 feet in the air, Daniel opened the file Morrison had given him. 6 faces stared back at him from personnel photos. Lieutenant Jake Donovan, Team Leader: Petty Officers Marcus Webb, Tyler Cross, Ryan Mitchell, David Palmer, and Jason Burke. All of them young, most under 30. All of them depending on a broken-down former SEAL who might get them all killed. Daniel pulled out a notepad and began sketching the terrain from memory, marking paths that weren't on any map, caves that only locals knew about, water sources hidden in narrow valleys. The mountains were coming back to him. Every ridge and wadi burned into his brain from those terrible weeks when he'd been hunted like an animal. The ghost of Kunar. That's what the Taliban had called him. The American who couldn't be killed, who appeared and disappeared like smoke, who'd somehow survived when an entire team had been wiped out. They didn't know the truth. Nobody did. They didn't know about the choices he'd made, the lines he'd crossed to survive. They didn't know what it had cost him, but maybe. Daniel thought as the plane carried him toward war again, maybe this was his chance at redemption. Not for himself, he was past redemption, but for those 6 men who deserved a ghost on their side. The helicopter dropped Daniel 3 kilometers from the trapped SEAL team's position, in a narrow valley that his map listed as uninhabited. He knew better. Nothing in Kunar Province was truly uninhabited. The mountains had eyes everywhere. He hit the ground running, his body remembering the rhythm despite the 3 years away. The weight of the pack, the way the rifle balanced in his hands, the constant scanning for threats, it all came back like muscle memory. Within minutes, he'd melted into the terrain, just another shadow among the rocks. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of copper and gold that would have been beautiful anywhere else. Here, it just meant he had maybe an hour of good light left before darkness. He needed to reach the SEALs before then, needed to assess their situation before attempting any extraction. Moving through the mountains felt like sliding back into a nightmare. Every boulder looked familiar. Every ridge could have been the one where Martinez died, or where he'd hidden for 3 days with Jackson's body. Too afraid to move, too stubborn to quit. His radio crackled. Ghost, this is Overwatch. Target teams taking fire. Heavy contact on their eastern perimeter. Daniel picked up his pace, his boots finding purchase on loose screed that would have sent most men tumbling. Years of training and months of living in these mountains had taught him how to move like water, following the path of least resistance. Through his binoculars, he spotted the muzzle flashes first, the SEAL team's position under siege. Dozens of Taliban fighters were positioned on higher ground, pouring fire down into a cluster of boulders where the Americans were pinned. It was exactly the nightmare scenario every special operator feared. Trapped, surrounded, with nowhere to run. Daniel counted enemy positions, noting their spacing, their discipline. These weren't random fighters. This was an organized unit, probably the same network that had hunted his team 3 years ago. They knew how to fight Americans. They knew how to wait. His radio crackled again. Ghost, Overwatch. The team leader is requesting immediate air support. Command says negative. You're all they've got. Daniel allowed himself a bitter smile. Of course, there was no air support. Just like last time, he needed to even the odds before making contact. Moving with practiced silence, he circled to the north, to a ridge overlooking the Taliban positions. The climb took 20 minutes, his breathing controlled, his movements deliberate. When he reached the top, he had a clear view of the entire battlefield. 12 enemy fighters on the eastern ridge. 8 more to the south. 4 manning a machine gun position that had the SEALs completely pinned. 24 total terrible odds for a frontal assault. But Daniel hadn't survived Kunar by being predictable. He pulled out a small drone from his pack, one of the specialized pieces of equipment the FBI had provided. It was no bigger than his hand, nearly silent, equipped with thermal imaging. He sent it sweeping over the battlefield, memorizing positions, looking for the pattern. There, The Taliban commander was positioned behind the machine gun team, coordinating the assault via radio. Take him out, and the attack would lose its cohesion. The fighters would become reactive instead of proactive. Daniel settled into a shooting position, his rifle's scope bringing the commander's face into sharp focus. The man was young, maybe 30, with a neat beard and expensive equipment. Probably easy trained, like most of the effective Taliban leaders. The shot was 600 meters, slightly uphill, with a crosswind coming off the ridge. Daniel made the calculations automatically, adjusting for elevation, wind drift, the settling of dusk. His finger rested lightly on the trigger. Then he stopped. 3 years ago, he would have taken the shot without hesitation. But 3 years ago, he'd been a different man. Before silent echo, before he'd learned that sometimes the people you trusted most were the ones who got you killed. He keyed his radio. Overwatch, Ghost. I need confirmation. These fighters, are they the same network we dealt with in silent echo? A pause. Affirmative, Ghost. Same leadership. Same tactics. They've been operating in this region continuously since your deployment. Daniel's jaw tightened. The same network. The same men who'd been tipped off about his team's insertion, who'd been waiting with a perfectly planned ambush. The same men who'd spent 19 days hunting him through these mountains. His finger tightened on the trigger. The rifle bucked against his shoulder. And 600 meters away, the Taliban commander dropped. Before his bodyguards could react, Daniel had shifted targets, taking down the machine gun team with 3 rapid shots. The distinctive crack of his rifle echoed off the mountains, announcing his presence. Below, the Taliban fighters scrambled for cover, suddenly aware they were the ones being hunted. Daniel moved immediately, knowing they'd be trying to locate his position. He slid down the back of the ridge, circled east, climbed to a new position. By the time they figured out where the first shots had come from, he was already somewhere else. He triggered his radio. Overwatch to SEAL team frequency. Ghost, switching you now. A new voice came through, tense and professional. Unknown shooter, identify yourself. Lieutenant Donovan, my name is Harper. I'm here to get you out. When I start shooting again, you're going to move west, down into the wadi. There's a cave system there, not on your maps. You'll be safe until dark. Who the hell are you? We don't have any support authorized for this operation. That's right, you don't. Which is why you're about to die unless you listen to me. I know these mountains, Lieutenant. I know the Taliban network hunting you. And I know how to disappear. So when I give you the signal, you move fast and you don't look back. How do we know you're not? Daniel fired again, taking down 2 fighters who were trying to flank the SEAL position. Because if I wanted you dead, you'd be dead. 30 seconds, Lieutenant. Get your men ready. He emptied his magazine in a controlled burst, forcing the remaining Taliban fighters to take cover. In the chaos, 6 men burst from the boulders and sprinted for the wadi. Daniel provided covering fire, his shots precise and devastating, each one buying the team precious seconds. By the time the Taliban regrouped, the SEALs were gone, swallowed by the rocky terrain. Daniel withdrew to a new position, watching through his scope as frustrated fighters searched the empty battlefield. An hour later, Daniel found the SEAL team in the cave system he'd described. They had weapons trained on the entrance, ready for anything. He approached with his hands visible, rifle slung across his back. Harper, he called out. Coming in. Lieutenant Donovan was younger than his file photo suggested, maybe 28, with the hard eyes of someone who'd seen too much combat too soon. His team was in rough shape, 2 wounded, 1 badly, all of them exhausted. Who are you? Donovan asked. 3 years ago, I was you. Same mountains, same Taliban network, same bad intelligence that left us surrounded and cut off. Daniel moved to the wounded man Marcus Webb, according to his gear. Gunshot wound to the shoulder, bleeding controlled but serious. Only I made it out, alone. The SEALs exchanged glances. One of them, Tyler Cross, spoke up. "Wait, Harper. Lieutenant Commander Harper. The ghost of Kunar. That's what they called me." "We heard stories," Cross continued. "They said you spent 19 days alone in these mountains, hunted by every Taliban fighter in the province. They said you were like a phantom, killed 17 enemy combatants and just disappeared. The stories are exaggerated." Daniel was working on Webb's shoulder, checking the dressing. "But yeah, I was here. And I learned things. Things that are going to keep you alive." The cave system was deeper than it looked from the entrance, a natural formation that had been expanded over decades by whoever controlled this part of the valley. Daniel led the team through narrow passages, his movements confident despite the darkness. He'd hidden in these caves before, during the worst days of his own survival ordeal. 3 years ago, Petty Officer Ryan Mitchell said, helping support the wounded Marcus Webb, "Why didn't we know about these caves? Why aren't they on our maps?" "Because the people who make the maps have never walked this ground," Daniel replied. "They use satellite imagery and local informants. But the informants lie, and satellites can't see through rock. I learned about this place the hard way, hiding from fighters who wanted me dead." They reached a wider chamber where Daniel called a halt. It was defensible, with multiple escape routes and far enough from the entrance that they could risk a small light. The team collapsed gratefully, their exhaustion evident. Lieutenant Donovan posted sentries and then approached Daniel, who was setting up a portable radio system. "We need to talk," the younger officer said. "Command is telling us you're not authorized to be here, that we should consider you a rogue element." Daniel didn't look up from his work. "Command is also telling you there's no extraction coming, that you're on your own because the mission you were on doesn't officially exist. So maybe trust your own eyes instead of voices on a radio." Fair point. Donovan sat down, wincing at injuries Daniel couldn't see. "Why are you really here?" "Because 3 years ago, 12 men went into these mountains on a mission that was compromised from the start. Because bad intelligence put us exactly where the enemy wanted us. Because I watched good men die, while the people who sent us there covered their tracks." Daniel finally met Donovan's eyes. "I got out. They didn't. And I spent 3 years. Knowing I could have done more, should have fought harder to expose what happened. This is my chance to make sure you don't end up like them." Donovan was quiet for a moment. "Your file says you took early retirement, honorable discharge, commendations, the works. What's it not saying?" "It's not saying that I was given a choice. Stay quiet about what happened and walk away clean, or try to fight and get buried in classified hearings that would go nowhere. They wanted Silent Echo to disappear, and I was the only witness left alive." Daniel's voice was bitter. "So I took the deal. I stayed quiet, and it's been killing me ever since." Tyler Cross approached, having heard the conversation. "The ghost of Kunar. We thought you were a legend, a story to scare Taliban fighters, but you were real the whole time." "Legends are cleaner than reality," Daniel said. "The real story is uglier. Mistakes, luck, choices I'm not proud of. Whatever story you heard, I promise you it's better than the truth." David Palmer, the team's medic, was working on Marcus Webb's shoulder when he spoke up. "We know something about ugly truths, Commander. Our mission was supposed to be a simple extraction, grab a high-value informant, and get out. Instead, we walked into an ambush just like you did. Someone knew we were coming. Someone wanted us dead." Daniel's hands stilled on the radio. "Describe your informant." "The target you were extracting. Pakistani national," Donovan said. "Claimed to have information about Taliban supply routes and Pakistani EC support networks. Our intel said he was reliable, that he'd been feeding us good information for months. And when you got to the extraction point, he wasn't there. Instead, We had 40 Taliban fighters waiting for us, positioned perfectly to cut off every escape route. We've lost good men to bad luck before, but this... Donovan shook his head. This felt intentional. Daniel stood abruptly, pacing the cave. His mind was racing, connecting dots he'd tried to ignore for 3 years. The informant who fed my team bad intelligence 3 years ago, he was Pakistani. He'd been reliable for months. And when we went into the mountains, he disappeared, and we walked into the exact same kind of ambush. The SEALs exchanged looks. Jason Burke, who'd been quiet until now, spoke up. "You think it's the same network? The same operation?" "I think someone has been running a long con," Daniel said. "Feeding American forces good intelligence to build trust, then using that trust to set up ambushes. My team was the first. You're just the latest." "But why?" Mitchell asked. "What's the point? We're not high-value targets. We're just operators doing our jobs." Daniel pulled out his tablet, accessing the files the FBI had given him. Because it's not about killing operators. It's about creating fear. Every time a SEAL team or Special Forces unit gets ambushed in these mountains, it makes command more cautious, more risk-averse. Which means fewer operations, less pressure on Taliban networks, more freedom for them to operate. He pulled up a map showing incident locations over the past 5 years. Red dots marked where American units had been ambushed or taken casualties. The pattern was clear, all in the same region, all following similar intel patterns, all resulting in maximum American casualties. 17 separate incidents. Daniel continued. 63 Americans killed, hundreds more wounded. And every single one started with intelligence from reliable Pakistani sources who promised easy wins and delivered death traps. Donovan stared at the map, his face hardening. And nobody connected the dots? Oh, someone connected them. But acknowledging the pattern means acknowledging that Pakistani intelligence has been actively killing American soldiers. It means a diplomatic crisis, international incident. So instead, each ambush gets treated as an isolated event. Bad luck. Fog of war. Daniel's voice was sharp with anger. And men keep dying. The cave fell silent, except for the drip of water somewhere in the darkness. Finally, Cross spoke. "So what do we do about it?" "We survive," Daniel said. "We get you out of these mountains alive. And then we make sure the truth comes out. All of it. No more classified files. No more quiet retirements." "They'll bury it again," Palmer said. "Just like they buried your story." "Maybe. But this time, there are 7 witnesses instead of 1. And this time, I'm not staying quiet." Daniel looked at each of them in turn. "We have about 6 hours until dawn. The Taliban will be hunting us, and they know these mountains almost as well as I do. We need to move fast and smart. Trust me, follow my lead, and maybe we all go home." Donovan stood, extending his hand. "The hell with command. You pulled us out of that kill box. You know this terrain. I'm putting my team in your hands, Commander Harper." Daniel shook his hand, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. 6 lives depending on him. 6 men who deserve better than what the system had given them, just like his team had deserved better 3 years ago. "Get some rest," he told them. "We move in 4 hours. And gentlemen, this is going to be the hardest thing you've ever done. These mountains break strong men, but we're SEALs. We don't break. We adapt. We overcome. And we never, ever leave a man behind." As the team settled in for brief rest, Daniel returned to his radio, establishing contact with Morrison and Chun. The FBI agents needed to know what he'd learned, needed to start building the case that would expose the Pakistani network. But in the back of his mind, another thought was forming. The Taliban commander he'd killed earlier, Daniel had recognized him. Not his face, but his tactics, his positioning. He'd fought this same man 3 years ago, During the final days of Silent Echo, which meant someone who knew about the first ambush was orchestrating this one. Someone who'd studied what happened to Daniel's team and was using the same playbook. Someone who thought the ghost of Kunar was gone for good. They were about to learn otherwise. Dawn broke cold over the Kunar Mountains, mist clinging to the valleys like a shroud. Daniel had the team moving before first light, navigating paths that existed only in his memory. Every step took them deeper into terrain that defied their maps, following routes that looked impassable but opened up for those who knew where to look. Marcus. Webb was struggling despite Palmer's medical care. The shoulder wound had stopped bleeding, but infection was setting in, and every jarring step brought visible pain. Daniel called a brief halt in a narrow defile, checking their back trail with his binoculars. "We've got company," he said quietly. 20 fighters, maybe more. They're good staying off the ridgelines, using the terrain. But they're following a pattern. "What pattern?" Donovan asked. "The same one they used 3 years ago when they hunted me." Daniel lowered the binoculars, his jaw tight. "They're hurting us, trying to push us toward the Peck Valley, where the terrain opens up. Once we're there, they can surround us again, call in reinforcements, finish what they started." "So we don't go to the Peck Valley," Mitchell said. "No, we go exactly where they don't expect." Daniel pointed to the map, to a peak that rose steep and brutal above them. "We go up." Cross stared at the mountain. "That's insane. It's a 1,000-meter climb, almost vertical in places. With a wounded man in full gear. We'll never make it. The Taliban will think the same thing, which is why they won't follow." Daniel was already packing up. 3 years ago, when they had me cornered, I went up a mountain like this. Spent 2 days climbing. No food, almost no water. They waited at the bottom, certain I'd either fall or have to come down. By the time they realized I'd gone over the top and down the other side, I was gone. "You climbed a mountain like this alone?" Burke's voice held disbelief. "While being hunted?" "I climbed it because I was being hunted. Fear is a hell of a motivator." Daniel looked at Webb. "Can you climb?" The wounded SEAL's face was pale, but his eyes were determined. "I can do anything for 6 more hours if it means going home to my daughter." The climb was brutal. They moved in pairs, one man climbing while another belayed with ropes from Daniel's pack. The mountain was unforgiving loose rock that gave way under their boots, sections where they hung by fingertips over 100-meter drops, freezing wind that cut through their gear. Halfway up, Webb collapsed. His shoulder had torn open again, blood soaking through the fresh bandages. Palmer was at his side immediately, but his face was grim when he looked at Daniel. "He needs a hospital, soon, or he's not going to make it." Daniel keyed his radio. "Overwatch, Ghost, we need emergency extraction. Wounded man, critical condition." Morrison's voice came back tense. "Ghost, we have assets moving to your location, but they're still 4 hours out. Can you hold?" "Negative. We need air evac now. There's no official presence in your area. Sending a helicopter would save a man's life." Daniel's voice was harsh. "I don't care about politics or deniability. Get us a bird or this sailor dies." Silence. Then Agent Chun came on. "Ghost, we have an option. It's risky. There's a Pakistani military helicopter conducting routine patrol 40 kilometers from your position. We can encourage them to respond to a distress call." Daniel understood immediately. The FBI was threatening to expose the Pakistani ISI's involvement in the ambush unless they provided extraction. It was blackmail, pure and simple. "Do it," he said. 30 minutes later, the sound of rotors echoed off the mountains. A Pakistani Air Force helicopter appeared, its pilot radiating reluctance as he brought the bird in close to their precarious position. The Pakistani crew chief stared at them with undisguised hostility. but he helped load Webb aboard. The rest of you, the pilot said in accented English, you are not authorized to be in Pakistani airspace. We're not in Pakistan, Daniel replied. Check your GPS. We're 50 meters inside Afghanistan. But thanks for your concern. The pilot's face darkened, but he didn't argue. The helicopter lifted off with Webb and Palmer aboard, disappearing into the morning haze. The remaining 5 SEALs watched it go. He's gonna make it? Mitchell asked. He'll make it, Daniel said. Now we finish this. They reached the summit as the sun climbed high, turning the mountains into a sea of brown and gray. Below them, they could see Taliban fighters still watching the valleys, waiting for targets that would never come. Daniel pulled out his radio and switched to an open frequency. This is Lieutenant Commander Daniel Harper, United States Navy SEALs. 3 years ago, you killed my team in these mountains. You hunted me for 19 days. You called me the ghost of Kunar because you couldn't catch me, couldn't kill me, couldn't understand how I survived. He paused, watching through binoculars as fighters below scrambled for their radios. I want you to know that I remember every one of my men who died. Jackson, Martinez, Williams, Thompson, Anderson, Ramirez, Chun, Foster, Burke, Patterson, and Davis. 12 good men who trusted bad intelligence. 12 families who deserved the truth. Donovan touched his arm. Commander, what are you doing? I'm making sure they know. Daniel's voice was steady, broadcasting to every Taliban radio in range. I survived because I learned your tactics. I learned your mountains. I learned to think like you. And now I'm back, and I've taken your prey away from you again. 5 American warriors are walking out of Kunar Province, and there's nothing you can do to stop us. Harper. You're painting a target on us, Cross said. No, I'm giving them what they wanted 3 years ago, a chance at the ghost. Daniel lowered the radio. And I'm giving you gentlemen the distraction you need to get home. Understanding dawned on Donna's face. You're not coming with us. The extraction point is 12 kilometers northeast, down in the valley. It's an easy walk from here, mostly downhill. Overwatch will guide you in, and you'll have air support once you're clear of the mountains. But the Taliban will follow you, all the way to the border if they can, unless I give them something else to chase. That's suicide, Burke said. 1 man against that whole network? Daniel smiled, and there was something cold in it. I've done it before. The difference is, this time, I'm not running. This time, I'm hunting. He pulled out a small drive from his vest and handed it to Donovan. Everything I know about the Pakistani network is on here. Names, dates, patterns. The FBI has copies, but this is insurance. You get this to the media, to Congress, to anyone who'll listen. Make sure the truth comes out about Silent Echo and about your mission. Make sure those 63 Americans didn't die for nothing. Donovan took the drive, conflict clear on his face. We don't leave men behind, Commander. You're not leaving me. I'm staying by choice. This is my mission now, the one I should have finished 3 years ago. Daniel clasped the younger man's shoulder. Get your men home, Lieutenant. Tell Webb his daughter is going to know her father. Tell your families you survived because you trusted a ghost. And when people ask how you made it out, tell them the truth. All of it. The SEALs stood silent for a moment, the wind whipping around them. Then, one by one, they came to attention and saluted. Daniel returned the salute, his throat tight. Move out, he said, and don't look back. He watched them descend the far side of the mountain, 4 figures growing smaller against the vast landscape. When they were out of sight, he turned to face the valleys behind him, where Taliban fighters were beginning to work out his position. Daniel began to move, heading not away from the enemy, but toward them. He'd spent 3 years running from these mountains, from the memories, from the guilt. Now it was time to face it all head-on, over the next 6 hours. Daniel became what the Taliban had always feared, a phantom moving through their mountains, striking without warning and disappearing before they could react. He hit their supply caches, destroyed their communication equipment, took out sentries with silent precision. Every move was calculated to draw them away from the SEALs' route, to make the ghost of Kunar too tempting a target to resist. But he wasn't invincible. A bullet grazed his leg. Shrapnel from a grenade caught his side. Exhaustion pulled at him like gravity. Still, he kept moving, kept fighting, buying time with his blood dot. As sunset painted the mountains red, Daniel's radio crackled. Morrison's voice. Ghost. The SEAL team has reached the extraction point. They're out. You can withdraw. Daniel was crouched behind a boulder, surrounded on 3 sides, his ammunition running low. He could hear Taliban fighters calling to each other, closing in. Just like 3 years ago. Full circle. Negative. Overwatch. I'm going to be delayed. Harper, don't be a hero. We can get you out. I'm not being a hero. I'm being a SEAL. Daniel checked his remaining magazines. 3 left. Those boys made it because of the distraction. If I withdraw now, the Taliban will shift focus, might catch them at the border. I need to keep the pressure here. Daniel. It was Agent Chun now, using his first name. You've done enough. You saved them. You kept your promise. Now save yourself. I saved 6 men today, Daniel replied. But I couldn't save 12 3 years ago. Maybe this balances the scales. Maybe it doesn't. But either way, I'm not running anymore. Your mother, Morrison started. Tell my mother I died doing what I was trained to do. Tell her it mattered. Tell her. Daniel's voice cracked slightly. Tell her I'm sorry I couldn't sit through more family dinners. But tell her I'm finally at peace. He disconnected the radio and prepared for the final stand. But then, as the Taliban fighters closed in, something unexpected happened. The sound of helicopters, multiple birds, American attack helicopters that shouldn't have been there. Morrison's voice crackled back on the radio, urgent. Ghost, change of plans. Your story went viral. The SEAL team didn't wait. They sent out everything the moment they hit the extraction point. Every news agency, every social media platform. The ghost of Kunar saving a SEAL team, exposing Pakistani involvement. Command can't bury this now. The political pressure they've authorized a full extraction. Hold your position. We're coming to get you. Daniel laughed, a sound that was half sob. They talked. They sure as hell did. And now everyone knows. About Silent Echo, about the ambushes, about all of it. Your team didn't die in vain, Commander. The truth is out. The helicopters roared overhead, their guns lighting up the mountainside. Taliban fighters scattered, caught completely off guard. An extraction bird descended toward Daniel's position, its crew chief reaching out as Daniel climbed aboard. Battered and bleeding but alive, he looked back at the mountains one last time. Somewhere down there were the places where his team had died, where he'd suffered and survived, where the ghost of Kunar had been born. But he wasn't a ghost anymore. He was just Daniel Harper, a SEAL who'd finally found his way home. 3 weeks later, Daniel stood in his mother's garden in Riverside, Montana. His leg was still healing, his side wrapped in bandages, but he was there for another family dinner. This time, he'd arrived early to help Patricia prepare. Kevin was bringing his family. Lauren was coming without Craig. They'd separated after the truth came out, after she'd seen what her husband had said to a man who'd sacrificed everything. And Daniel's mother was baking apple pie, humming softly, her eyes brighter than they'd been in years. The doorbell rang. Daniel answered it to find not his family, but Lieutenant Donovan and the 5 SEALs he'd saved. They stood on the porch in their dress uniforms, Marcus Webb's arm still in a sling but his smile wide. We were in the area, Donovan said. Thought we'd stop by. Pay our respects to the man who saved our lives. Daniel's throat tightened. I just did my job. No, sir, Webb said. You did more than that. You gave me a chance to meet my daughter. You gave all of us a future. And you exposed a network that was killing American soldiers. That's not just doing your job. That's being a hero. Patricia appeared behind Daniel, wiping flour from her hands. She took one look at the young men, understood immediately, and smiled. I hope you boys like apple pie. I've got 6 extras, and it seems like fate that you showed up. Over dinner, Daniel told his family the real story for the first time. About Silent Echo, about the 19 days alone, about the choice he'd made to stay silent and the price it had cost him. About the mission to save the SEAL team and the decision to face his demons head-on. When he finished, his mother took his hand. You've been carrying this alone for so long, she said. No more, Daniel. No more silence. No more hiding. No more ghosts, Kevin added. The story exploded across the nation in the following weeks. Congressional hearings. Media investigations. The Pakistani EC network was exposed and dismantled. 63 families finally got answers about how their loved ones had died. And Daniel's team, the 12 men of Silent Echo, were posthumously honored as heroes. Their names no longer buried in classified files. Craig showed up one last time at a ceremony where Daniel received a medal for his rescue of the SEAL team. He approached awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable. I was wrong about you, Craig said. I didn't understand. I'm sorry. Daniel looked at the man who'd mocked him, who'd called him broken and useless, and felt nothing but pity. You couldn't understand. You've never had to choose between the truth and your career, between loyalty and silence. I hope you never have to. He walked away, leaving Craig standing alone. 6 months later, Daniel stood on a ridge in Montana, far from Kunar Province, but similar in its rugged beauty. He'd bought a small ranch with his savings, a place where veterans could come to heal, to talk, to remember. The first guests had arrived last week, young men and women struggling with their own ghosts. He'd learned something in those mountains across the world. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit you need help. Sometimes survival means accepting that you can't carry the weight alone. And sometimes redemption comes not from forgetting the past, but from facing it head-on and choosing to use it to help others. His phone buzzed. A text from Donovan. Webb's daughter took her first steps today. Wanted you to know. You gave us this. Daniel smiled, looking out over the mountains. He thought about his team, Jackson Martinez, and all the others. About the ghost of Kunar. About the broken man who'd sat in Murphy's diner, believing he was beyond redemption. That man was gone. In his place stood someone stronger, not because he'd survived, but because he'd finally learned to live with his survival. To honor the fallen by helping the living. To turn his scars into strength for others. The sun was setting, painting the Montana sky in shades of gold and red. Daniel took a deep breath of clean mountain air and headed back to the ranch house, where veterans were gathering for dinner, sharing their stories, finding their way back from darkness. The ghost of Kunar had finally found peace. And in finding it, he'd helped others find theirs. Lieutenant Commander Daniel Harper had come home at last, not to a place, but to a purpose. And that made all the difference. The end.